The title today is A Theory of Religion, and that's what Don has been working towards both all his life and working towards today. So Don will now conclude his series of 4 lectures, or the 4th part of his lecture. I believe in this one he's going to read from a prepared text. Then again we open it up to you, reminding you that this is a workshop and is therefore as participatory as we can make it. And don't be afraid to ask challenging questions and to tell Don in a forthright way what you think is wrong with his theory, as well as telling him how wonderful he is.
I have a Conservative colleague called Brian Helfrich, who's an old friend with whom I do a knockabout double act occasionally. We just abuse each other at length at some sort of church occasion. And there might be possibilities of developing an act of the same kind with David Bolton. I'd be interested. Yes, I've saved up some new ideas for the last lecture. They have to do with the fact that none of our traditional religions is entirely at ease with the modern world. They don't like the fact that in the modern world, everything is humanly negotiated, plural and shifting. Every religion claims to be a closed, finished, complete little world for its own members by itself. And in that little world, nothing need ever change. But inevitably, such faiths are ill at ease with our late modernity. Language gets us trying to think about this theory of religion, you may notice, is it takes the form, roughly, of a theory of the difference between sacred and profane love. The formula I begin from is this: religion is cosmic feeling. I'm often accused of being a dry rationalist who underestimates the importance of the emotions. But in fact, my thinking has been moving in the opposite direction towards emotivism for many years. We are animals. Our life largely consists in, or rides upon, a continuous outpouring stream of biological feeling. This turbid river of emotion, the basis of our personal life, was traditionally called by philosophers the passions. It varies from one person to another in ways that used to be described in terms of each person's typical balance of humours or temperament. Today we may speak of a person's disposition or mood, but the truth is probably we never had and still do not have a satisfactory vocabulary in this area. As well as the standing, endogenously generated stream of emotion or typical mix of emotions upon which our personal life rides, there's also our constantly changing emotional response to incoming stimuli from the environment. Both our cognition and evaluation grow out of this primal feeling response to the events of life. Finally, there's a third major factor in our emotional life. We're intensely social beings, and the emotions are highly contagious. Feeling that is shared with others becomes more definite, is greatly enhanced, and gives us greater pleasure. That is why we usually arrange to have a companion when we go to a concert, an exhibition, a cinema, or a new place. Sharing an experience makes it more definite and more identifiable. In this first brief sketch, then, our flowing emotional life has 3 tributaries. There's our temperament or disposition, the typical mix of inwardly generated, outflowing feeling that supports our personal life all the time. There is our ever-changing emotional response to input from the environment, and there is the social communing with others through which our feeling life gains clarity, enhancement, and pleasure, as when we feel better after a good heart-to-heart, or when we remember who was with us when we first saw this or that. Next, I turn to the relation between feeling and language. Language being the chief means by which we share our feelings and give them meaning. As in Schopenhauer's philosophy, the striving of the will seeks relief by coming out all the time into symbolic representation, so our outpouring life of feeling seeks expression. This means that it seeks symbolic expression, perhaps in music or in dance, but above all in words. When we've been able to get feelings off our chests and into the right words, they are relieved, but they're by no means only relieved, for by getting out into concrete symbolic expression, our feeling becomes more definite, more enhanced, more pleasurable, and more generally available to others, that is, more public. Even more yet, in our fullest self-expression, we find that we become ourselves and are able to recognize ourselves. And there's more to tell, for in our differential feeling response to our experience, both colour and contrast enter our entire vision of the world. I mean, of course, that our whole vision of the world is coloured up by our feeling response to it. From this, we glimpse a little of the extraordinary power of language. Language's power to make something out of our feelings, to make poetry, to make the world, to make ourselves, is so great that we should probably think of language as actively eliciting the emotions it wants to express. To put the point afresh, one may say that form often seems to precede matter. Our language actually draws out the feeling life that it is supported by and that it also expresses. Following in the Schopenhauer and Freud tradition, we're apt to think of the emotions as powerful natural forces that build up a great head of steam inside us. These natural drives seek expression, but if social prohibitions block their natural expression, they may seek to evade the censorship and find some permitted symbolic outlets instead. The model here is very 19th century. It pictures nature as coming first and culture as battling with rather mixed success to hold down nature, which nevertheless often slips out in disguise. But I'm suggesting that the picture of the self as a sort of steam engine, with the emotions being like steam under great pressure, and art as a kind of safety valve, is misleading. On the contrary, I'm suggesting that so great is the power of language and art and religion that very often we should see it as itself awakening our emotions, drawing them out and giving them the courage as well as the means to come out into expression. This reverses the traditional relationship between nature and culture. In 19th century thinking, nature came first. It was an unruly collection of animal desires and drives, each interested only in its own gratification. Culture battled to discipline and control nature, laying down the law about the conditions under which it could be permitted gratification. Typically, the biological drive comes up against the barrier of cultural censorship and sneaks past in disguised form as the symptom. The common factor in all this Schopenhauer to Freud thinking is that nature comes before culture and Mr. Hyde before Dr. Jekyll. But since World War II, there has begun an attempt to reverse the order and put culture first. Language then begins to be seen as producing reality. Language evokes or elicits or calls forth the feelings to which it gives expression. The postmodernist attempt to put culture first and give it priority over nature is often seen as paradoxical, yet in a sense it's obvious. For example, we teach our children a sense of humour by telling them lots of jokes and mocking them if they fail to understand them. We teach shy young persons how to fall in love by giving them stacks of romantic novels. In religion, similarly, we teach people faith by introducing them to religious practice, as when we say that the only way to acquire belief in God is by the practice of prayer, praying as if one believes until one's learned beliefs. In cases like these, we teach nature by using culture. We use culture, as it were, to produce nature. We get to the supposedly natural aptitude, a sense of humour, falling in love, the desire to God, not directly, but only via the cultural expression that's usually pictured as secondary. That's the only way we can proceed, is the way we do proceed. For example, if I want to find out if my child has a natural ear for music, I send her to piano lessons, which are highly cultural. How else could I find out? Language, then, has great power over our life of natural feeling. It draws it out, differentiates it, forms it, channels it, gives it expression. All of which helps to explain why the feeling life of humans is so much more intense and rich and excessive than the feeling life of animals. We are very stormy. Compared with us, animals are sober, rational creatures who can't afford to waste their energies. The exigencies of survival require them to be quietly efficient. Thus, the feeling life of animals usually keeps closely in line with their immediate biological needs. But we, because we have language, we have an astounding hypertrophy of culture. Because language is so easily bent back upon itself, it quickly introduces us to irony, humour, a sense of doubleness and consciousness. Language therefore breaks free of the biological demands of the present moment and greatly enhances our feeling life. I'm saying then that human beings are symbolic, expressive creatures whose expressive powers, as it were, reinforce themselves, feed on themselves. Language gets us trying to think outside ourselves and to feel beyond ourselves. Language introduces us to a feeling life far beyond what animals experience. We feel awe at the greatness of the world, awe and dread at the human condition, fear as we contemplate the unknown future and our own deaths, and cosmic love for natural beauty and for our own feeling of being alive. This discussion enables us to recognize a dialectical relationship between language and religious feeling. First, religious language and symbolism and ritual tend to teach cosmic religious feeling by evoking it and making it habitual in us who are trained in religion from childhood. This is particularly true of symbolically rich forms of religion, such as Roman Catholicism, and many a lapsed Catholic has testified that whatever happened to their personal beliefs, the old symbols will go on evoking the old emotions until the end of their lives. Even a lapsed Catholic is indelibly a Catholic. Secondly, I've suggested that in an older and more primal sense, it was language itself that first made us religious. Because words are general, any use of language may evoke other places and occasions than the present, and therefore language always tends to lift us above the animal's customary state of total absorption in its own present biological imperative. Language, as ordinary people say, makes you think. And I've also suggested that because language is so easily used to refer to itself, it everywhere teaches people a certain doubleness, which is manifested in irony, humour, consciousness, and self-consciousness. But when language breaks free in this way, and we become self-mocking, self-aware, self-conscious, then emotion too breaks free and becomes cosmic and sublime. One becomes a single self-questioning individual, filled with wonder, awe, dread, even fear and horror at the mystery of one's own human existence. We've been playing with the formula, religion is cosmic feeling. Now we can try to become more specific. A number of writers have suggested that there is one particular religious emotion, such as the sense of awe and dread that one feels in the presence of the holy, the sacred. A rather different candidate for being the specifically and distinctively religious experience is the extrovertive type of experience in which objects in the external world are seen as if one is Vincent van Gogh and about to have an epileptic fit. The object is throbbing, highly coloured, super real. There's a very strong feeling of significance or meaningfulness. Now, I reject both these accounts, and I agree with William James when he says that there's no one elementary religious emotion. But I disagree with William James when he adds that there's only a common storehouse of emotions upon which religious objects may draw, and then goes on to say that religious love, for example, is only man's natural emotion of love directed to a religious object. That I disagree with because it doesn't sufficiently stress that the religious object is not an object like ordinary finite objects, and therefore religious love is not at all like ordinary profane love. Let's pursue this example. Profane love, eros, is closely related to our biological makeup. It is awakened by and it fastens upon a particular finite object to which it cleaves with intense, jealous and exclusive attachment. It's very realistic in the sense that it is other-centered. It starts from the other absorbs its whole attention. For me, it has to be this one particular person and no other. The divine love or universal compassion of which religion speaks is quite different. It has no finite object. Indeed, it's not based in its object at all. It is an objectless, undiscriminating and boundlessly generous love. It flows out in all directions. It doesn't respect persons. It's like the sun which rises on the just and the unjust alike. Agapeistic love is cosmic emotion, a boundless love of life, love of it all, love of everything. To love in this way is to love God, because this sort of love just is God. It's a universal disposition that overflows the biological limits by which other and lesser loves are confined. When we understand what this love is, we recognize what a profound error is made by all those people and institutions that believe in realistic theism. The realist God is not the true God, and object-fixated love is not divine love. The official church has got God wrong. Against this background, we can now define the religious affections. They are those emotions that can become cosmic, i.e. boundless, infinite. When I'm thankful to God, for example, I'm cosmically grateful, grateful for everything, grateful to it all, grateful for it all, grateful to life. I am, for the moment, utterly content that things are as they are, and I don't want anything to be different. I feel blessed, privileged, just glad to be alive. That's cosmic thanksgiving or gratitude. What makes it divine is its objectlessness. For I'm not grateful to anybody, but I'm just boundlessly grateful. Notice for me, the religious feeling is essentially feeling without a traditional type of object or subject, Years ago, with a companion, I scrambled to a Lake District peak and sat down to draw breath and gaze at the view. Near us was a small party of ordinary people who were awed by the beauty of the day. I feel privileged, I heard one woman say, one of the purest and simplest religious confessions I've ever heard. Few of us say anything better than that. I'm not sure that there's anything better than that to be said. And that's my theory of religion in a nutshell. True religion is to be able, quite unaffectedly, to say something like that on an occasion like that. And I should remark that a fellow human being, for example, one who's in trouble, may well provoke cosmic emotion too. It's so easy to quote the landscape example that one may neglect to mention other very different examples. Now, if you're a religious person, you will have noticed that genuine religious feeling of the kind I describe has many of the traditional attributes of God. It is not volatile, but is constant. It's not attached to or dependent upon any particular object, but is free. It arises from itself, arse in Latin, and arseity was a traditional attribute of God, from himselfness. It's not passionate or turbulent, but full and deep. It seems to embrace the whole world, unbounded, infinite, and undiscriminating. It pours out of the self, and in that way is rather like the feeling for the sublime, especially in landscape. When we experience strong religious feeling, we understand what it once was to believe in God. God was like this. Perhaps when I go walking in my favorite landscapes today, I'm seeking to recover the very intense feeling for God that I had at the age of 20 or so. But in a more rational moment, I recognize that pure, intense religious feeling really is our say of itself. It doesn't depend on the existence of a metaphysical God. And in our entirely post-metaphysical age, it's important to testify that it can survive in us as strong and deep as ever. In some ways, religious experience after God is better and purer than it was in the epoch of belief in God. It's the same as what I've recently been calling world love and the love of life. Ludwig Feuerbach was perhaps the first philosopher to understand and to state these things. He salvages the divine attributes after the death of God. He transfers them to love so that we can continue to experience them and be blessed by them. Poor man, he has few sympathetic readers even yet. Well, I think I see I'm running out of time, so I probably should stop. But I'm suggesting that in our multi-faith, changing, open texture society, we need people trained in that sort of religion. Religion that's not fixated onto one particular object, one particular set of rituals and doctrines and so on. A religious feeling that is free, open, objectless and even subjectless. I'm imagining the religious person of the future as being a little bit like the soldier in a blue beret, the United Nations peacekeeper, and that soldier doesn't himself have a nationality at all. He's not on sides at all. He's simply there to make peace. Imagine the religious person as being like that. One's not locked into, like a nationalist, locked into a particular religious identity, set of doctrines, community, language, law, sacred law, and so on. One is religious in a free sort of way, and one experiences religious feeling. Religion's liberating because it teaches you that kind of way of burning off the human excessive emotion in generosity of feeling for life and for others. So that's the very, very brief outline, what it'll take a book to spell out in full, but an indication of how I want to describe religion after the end of the traditional doctrines. That's why I say on the handout, the task of religion is now to produce citizens of the late modern multi-faith and multi-ethnic state. People who are beliefless, empty, and without identity. People who are spiritually disciplined to live without clinging to and to live without excluding any others. Such people will be selfless lovers of life and of others. Sacred love is not fixated. It has no subject and no object. An early example of such a people was Dag Hammarskjöld, who wrote a rather impressive work of spirituality while he was Secretary General of the United Nations. There's a puzzle here about nationalism, I think, both for your country and for mine. Because America is a highly multinational founded nation, there's a question of whether the United States is itself truly a nation, because these, and whether there could be or should be such a thing as American nationalism. In Britain, Britain has been so colonial, has, so to say, England has lost its identity in the larger groups that it's set up, such as the United Kingdom. In a sense, the English are not conscious of being nationalist at all, but perhaps we're stuck with the kind of inheritance of it. I don't know. At any rate, the religious version of nationalism, being exclusively locked on to one set of religious allegiances only, I think needs to come to an end. I think we need to become more open and plural, and I think a better understanding of religious feeling will help us do that. We'll find a spirituality that makes us completely open to life and to others without questions of religious identity dividing us. I'm very bothered about the fact that in the modern world, religion is so often a factor in war all over the world. To get rid of that, we've somehow got to purge religion of its exclusivism, of its constant desire to distinguish between us and them. Well, I offer that to you for discussion.
Well, Don has offered us so much for discussion during the day, and the floor is now yours. Yes.
Thank you. Well, I'm wondering whether I interpret you correctly in feeling that you're sort of substituting morality for religion in the sense that the old way, the religious stories, the beliefs, and the stories were taken as guides for moral behavior, guides for morality. They're sort of the foundation from which we justify ourselves in our moral life and our moral choices and our values. It looked to me like you were turning things over the other way, sort of beginning from the fact that we are capable of responding to human need, to awaken within us the emotions, these positive emotions, these nourishing, life-affirming emotions, and saying, all right, this is what ought to be the guide in the way we interpret the religious stories. And some religious stories lend themselves in very interesting ways to be interpreted in positive ways. We're not, it's the moral insight, it's the foundation. And other stories perhaps have to be discarded or viewed with suspicion because they might lead us to exclusivist or negative forms of morality. Am I right that you're kind of switching things around here? Instead of giving us the religious foundation as the basis for accepting the Ten Commandments and everything else, you're doing it the other way, that we're going to be able to use the inspiration of religious stories only insofar as they serve the more universal moral emotions, something like that? Have I misinterpreted?
Most of the great faiths started off primarily ethical, but have tended to get more and more ritualized as the centuries have gone by. And what I was particularly criticizing was the way in which in all religions people tend to get fetishistic about various tokens of identity and passwords by which you establish that you really belong, as it were. And these proofs of belonging become the most important thing. And any apostasy or failure to produce your tokens of loyalty and so on is treated as the gravest possible sin, and so on. I was hoping for a more uncommitted religious outlook. The account of the religious affections I gave owes something to Buddhism. Because, of course, in Buddhism you have strong religious feeling without any belief in supernatural beings. That's to say, although belief in gods and spirits is found in Buddhism, it's not an essential part of the religious system. And Buddhists are accustomed to the idea of objectless religious feeling. Yes. And disinterested, non-possessive, non-acquisitive enjoyment, whether of works of art or of landscape, or just of delight in life, is at least a starting point for understanding what religion's like. But we convert our intense human passions into universal feelings, which are not fixated. We should resist religious fixation. Do you see what I'm after? I don't think I was saying anything inconsistent with what I was saying in earlier sessions. Rather, I was asking how religion can adapt itself to living in our extremely plural and multi-faith world, where the religions are so often at each other's throats. I'm astonished by the obduracy with which Hindus at the moment are determined to provoke war with Muslims over Ayodhya, or the way in which Muslims too seem to be embattled all around the world. Muslims are always in battle. They always feel they're a aggrieved minority. Smaller nations like the Serbs always feel that they are an aggrieved, put upon minority. How do we get those feelings out of people? That was the question I was trying to suggest an answer to. Notice a consequence of what I said that may annoy people. I'm not keen at all in the use of erotic imagery in mysticism. I think it's often been done in the past by celibates, but I rather wanted to stress the I rather wanted to stress the difference between sacred and profane love, admitting that, of course, sacred love is possessive and does fixate. That's the way it works. That's the way life is. But religious love is completely open and doesn't lock on to just one object, nor does it even proceed from just one subject. It's a kind of open, universal disposition. You see what I'm after? No? Do you want to pursue the matter? Or perhaps somebody else would like to take it on? Madam. Yeah.
I can talk loud enough. I think that in Christianity there is, I mean, you mentioned the saints and so on, certain saints that have had what we call a religious experience. And they have been condemned by the church because of how they describe their experience. Now, I tie it in with Buddhism in a way because when I was studying Buddhism and trying to learn more about it, I ran across a book that was called Zen in English Literature. And they mentioned a lot of like St. John of the Cross and others, that is really, they're describing a Buddhist experience. So.
Yes, there is in Nagarjuna a doctrine that enlightenment may perhaps have been discovered many times in human history, not only by the Buddha, because Buddhism doesn't need the concept of a special divine revelation as the only way we could acquire important religious truth. According to Buddhists, you might discover the way to enlightenment just by accident, by yourself. and they think it perhaps often happened. Yes. Incidentally, another example of disinterested pleasure I've noticed, in Western countries, since the early 19th century, public art galleries have opened, and anybody can go in and enjoy works of art and perhaps get a very great feeling, very great pleasure from them, without any payment. In Britain, they're still free, the major art galleries, with much battling, and that helps to make the enjoyment of things that are great unselfish and without any thought about what it costs or who it belongs to and so on. So that, in a rather similar way, the endless availability nowadays of very high quality music, very cheaply, gives people access to the good things in life free. And that's an excellent thing for teaching disinterestedness, if you like, a disinterested enjoyment.
What you seem to be saying at the beginning about the interaction between language and emotion and language in the world is, puts me in mind of Wittgenstein's remark that human beings are creatures for whom speaking a language is a part of their natural history. So that having a culture gives us a second nature, if you like. And if when we learn a language we are inevitably initiated into some set of practices and some tradition, we're always going to be situated. Maybe the way to go in purifying religious emotions of these fixations and fetishes and obsessions is not by transcending the particular, but by appealing to what, let's say in the Christian tradition, combats this kind of obsessiveness and fixation. I mean, it's what used to be called idolatry, what you're talking about. Yeah. And it strikes me that there are resources in Christianity, just as there are resources in Hinduism and Islam and Judaism, for dealing with that within the tradition itself. So Jews will never be Christians and we will never be Muslims or Hindus, but we can live together by drawing on our own particularities that enable us to avoid the kind of dangers that you're talking about.
Yes, interesting point. Yes, yes. I'd like to think that was generally possible, rather as in London nowadays, many people enjoy the great cultural variety. There's said to be 150 first languages in London schools nowadays. It's an awful job for the teachers, as it is also for doctors, family doctors, to cope with people with such amazing linguistic variety. How do you get such a mixed society freely mingling with each other without complaints and grievances and hostilities? Well, perhaps it can be done through education, as people are better informed about other religions. But thanks for the point. Yes, I was contrasting in my remarks the rather crude 19th century model of the self as generating a kind of steam pressure of emotion, which looks for some form of expression and perhaps finds symbolic expression, replacing that by the view that you mentioned of human beings as having made their communicativeness and their use of language into a kind of second nature by which they activate their emotional life, their desires, their behaviors. Language has generative as well as descriptive powers, and religious language does too. Yes, thank you for that.
Would you care to comment, or I'd be interested in your observations as an interested outsider, on what I perceive to be a huge religious struggle going on within this country over basic values and direction of the country, you know, to get Bush and his team out of office, and what to replace him with, and what kind of values, you know, like in terms of international as well as national policy, in terms of how this affects life and the ongoing of life, because I see the policies of the Bush administration antithetical to the whole principle of life you've been talking about?
This is a sort of political controversy I have no right at all to enter into. I did notice yesterday a cartoon in one of the papers about the matter of, was it a southern state governor who recently tried to introduce a sculpture representing the Ten Commandments into his state capital, and was obliged by the Supreme Court to move it out. And in this sculpture, a couple of members of the public were looking at it and saying, looking at this sculpture, and saying, look, it's the second of these things says you're not to make a graven image. And of course, the thing itself is a graven image. And so the making of a graven image of the Ten Commandments is a marvelous example of religious fetishism, since the commandments prohibit exactly that. And it is that kind of absurdity, that sliding into fanaticism, which is giving religion such a bad name at the moment, and we've got to find some way of getting free of. At least that's one factor here, and it is to some extent in Britain too. There's a real danger that the same impulse that's created Islamic fundamentalism will spread to all the other faiths, including Christianity. And lead to a fresh wave of international religious conflicts. I would certainly hate there to develop a general atmosphere of war between Christians and Muslims. That would be a disaster. We should try to avoid that.
In my lay ministry, I'm having some fun with the fact that the people I run into so often in the bar over the pool table are rejecting the faith of their parents, of their culture, be it Catholic, Mormon, Seventh-day, Jehovah, whatever. And so we've had some problem here today with Presbyterians too. But anyway, I am wondering in part where you're going, having come from whatever tradition you were a part of, to where now you look back at your old writing and understand that maybe you wouldn't have said exactly what you said then, and you are writing now and maybe tomorrow wouldn't say then what you're saying today. Do you have a clue then where you're going in terms of replacing what you once had as you develop that which you're on your way to? I am thinking myself, beyond what I've said, about the fact that Muhammad wrote about honoring all the prophets, and part of our language problem is that Christians are claiming Jesus as God, and the best that the Islamic can do, the Muslim can do, is to accept him as a prophet. And if we are going to war about this difference in language and understanding, then we really aren't going to get past where we are, religious wars, as you mentioned. So that's a consideration, a part of language that we're trying to develop. You changed, thank you, a bumper sticker of mine today. It was a little less gracious before. And so I'm writing now, all of religion is like a black hole, all suck and no glow. And I have no problem at all with rejecting religion. But I don't replace it with something that doesn't not understand a divine person of God. And with an experience in that, I know that you can't teach what you don't know, and I'll not try to do that here now. But we are in this process. We can work on it together, and I'm all for the new language. I'm writing in my work of purification, not perfection, and I'm using another verb that combines the ed and the ing endings so that that which was and has been established is now an ongoing and still developing and growing thing. This is a part of the language that I'm trying to work with and bring to it. And so your comments on where you're going in this
Thanks for that. I have described my books as a projet fleuve, a flowing project without any very definite destination and not knowing quite where I'll be taken next. As I see it now, religion is the struggle in an impossibly complicated world in which tragedy and comedy meaning and chaos are all jumbled up together to find some sort of basis on which one can live a reasonably stable life. Religion is a search for, if you like, a way to selfhood, a way of living that makes some kind of sense in a world like ours. It's not easy. I've been changing continuously, rather reluctantly. I was still a conservative in the 60s, and then we went thoroughly radical from the mid-70s or late 70s. And where I'll end up, I don't know. Until this year or last, I felt fairly confident I was still on the move. I'm afraid of repeating myself. At the moment, I know I'm a bit different from what I was 2 or 3 years ago, still changing. At some stage, you have to shut up. But I don't think there is a definite destination to reach, because in these matters you can find that you get to a point which for you is a hard-won victory to manage to reach this conviction, and then you discover that other people have been there for ages. That's often the case. We each of us have to carve out some kind of path through life that makes sense. Everybody is a pilgrim nowadays. It's not going to be easy to work out fresh, big, common stories. So at least I've tried to tell my story and encourage other people in outfits like the Sea of Faith to tell theirs. But no, I have no answer except to testify where from time to time I've felt happy, felt able for a while to make sense and find some kind of rest. I'm chronically restless, and it's very hard to explain to normal, sensible people what an intellectual life is like and why it is that one is constantly shifting and discontented. I find that impossible to excuse.
Isn't that the nub of the problem, though, that we enjoy the flow and the discontent and the questioning and the moving on? That for us is quite a, for many of us, is a very liberating way of living. But for millions of people out there, what they want is certainties, and simple certainties, and conclusions and explanations. And how are we going to connect or convey our sense of liberation and joy at the exploration to find relief in a religion of certainties and dogma?
Yes. That situation is much worse, of course, for millions and millions of our contemporaries. We, in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, have had some centuries to adjust to modernity. The change has been gradual. It's been going on since about 1500. But when we go to Asia, the great modern cities of Asia, we see people whose parents were born in remote villages in peasant culture, hardly into the Iron Age. They seem to have come centuries and centuries just within their own lifetime. You wonder what on earth they make of the violence of the upheavals they've lived through. I'd like to see more literature voicing the struggle of those people to make sense of their world and their lives. It's relatively easy for us. We know there's been fierce arguments about questions of faith in our tradition for centuries. We're still sorting it out. But what about the people who go straight from tribal culture into postmodernity? It must be awful. And I don't think there's any way of giving to people the certainties they crave except through the ideologies which the 20th century has tried and rightly rejected. So I don't know, there's no short answer, I think, to the violence of the upheaval people suffer. But it reminds me, by the way, that when some years ago I visited the Eskimos, the Inuit of northern Canada, I did learn how some of them have attempted to reject modern Western culture and go back in full to their traditional way of life with all the beliefs and so on, the shamans and the rest of it. But they take mobile phones so that if somebody breaks a leg, they can call up an air ambulance. And nobody actually can drop out of Western culture. Sorry. You may claim to, you may want a sort of holiday from it, but you'll come back to it when you're in trouble.
I'm just trying to imagine a seminar workshop of Inuit people and Don together. It'd be fascinating. Now, I'm going to ask if there's... well, I don't need to ask because I can already see. We've only got a few more minutes, and I can see 3 hands up at the moment. So what I'm going to suggest, I can now see 4 hands up, but no more. What I'm going to suggest is that if each of you can ask your question or make your point in say 1 minute, then do that, and then Don will have a few minutes to respond to you and to sum up. So if we can start over here.
In John Hick's autobiography, he lists some esteemed religious philosophers and theologians, and when he comes to you, he describes you as a total unrealist. And he contrasts that to what he perceives in his study of Buddhism and other major world religions, a universal reality. Can you kind of comment on that in terms of the distinction between those?
Yes.
Just hang on before you do. Let's take the 4. Let's take the 4 and then sort of wrap them all up together. Yes.
Yes, I noticed we started out when God turned into be life. And I got God out of my thinking and my religion a long time ago. And I go with nature and life and things like that. However, I have a problem when I'm speaking with other people about religion. God still seems to be that power that's up there with the lightning bolt. And I'm wondering what your favorite expression for the power is when you're conversing with other God-infested people.
Remind me who the other... Yes, thank you.
I was very interested this morning in your section on the outsideness of life when you talked about the search for personal purity and preparing or affirmative ethical theory. And I'm most concerned about the style that's evident in society. And you certainly talked about this negative style when you said the words like retaliation, revenge, confrontation, and certainly the verbal violence that goes on in everything from our global politics to our personal interaction, and certainly our religious wars. And the style is so negative. I would be interested in hearing what words you hear that point to a change in this style toward the direction that you've been talking about. For example, using words that are synonyms for love, like possibly comprehensive care or compassion, or other positive words for how we interact with each other as nations and as individuals.
Okay, and the last one.
We know that Jesus was good at giving one-liners that shocked people, and you being in good company, this one shocked me when I first read it. I think I know what you meant. But the task of religion is now to produce people who are beliefless, empty, and without identity. Of course, you go on to say something that I agree with. But if a person, I think to find anybody that is beliefless, I think that's, first of all, an impossibility. I think that anytime we drop one belief, we immediately usually replace it. And to be empty, I think, would be lifeless. And not have identity, I think that is something that is, if I would say, I believe that my identity is wrapped up in being full of love and a selfless lover of life and of others, would you want that person to be beliefless?
Okay, this morning, Don was often giving 3 answers to 1 question. Now this is the opportunity to give 1 answer to 4 questions.
Thanks very much. Very briefly, I've been warring against John Hick for years because he and I are so close to each other. Recently, I was able to send him details of a recent Chinese publication called From Hick to Cupitt. On the question of new vocabulary for talking about God, I don't know any. I think God language will continue to be valuable for some time yet. It gives you a good vocabulary in which to debate a lot of important questions. So I don't think God is, so to say, religiously dead yet. On the question of how we're to ease world conflicts, I do believe in trade. Trading back and forth is itself a kind of symbolic exchange. And so I'm keen on things like free trade and international relations, and we just have to keep talking. On the question of belieflessness, I was talking about being free of the aggressively ideological type of belief which religions have so often valued. I don't mean without loyalties, of course. It's just that I don't think we should fetishize correct belief. I rather like the Buddhist recommendation that you bracket off the fundamental questions and get on with walking the path, and gradually you'll find the fundamental questions sorting themselves out. We will stop. David. Thank you.
Well, I think you can see why it is that Don has been described as possibly the most important thinker of the philosophy of religion in the English-speaking language. And it's been a huge privilege and enormously stimulating. I know that you'll all share that with me in hearing him and being able to question him and discuss these things with him throughout the day. You'll see why it is that he has so successfully inspired a network, the Sea of Faith network, which is growing in the UK, in Australia and New Zealand, and in almost everywhere except America, where you have the Weststar Institute, so you don't need us quite so much. If you want to know more about the Sea of Faith network, the very best thing to do is read Don's books. The second best thing to do is just look at our little stall out there and see what magazines and booklets are left, because half of them have already been taken. And then if you still want to know even more about the Sea of Faith network and its approaches, then the third best thing you could do is to read my book, which is called The Trouble with God, Religious Humanism and the Republic of Heaven, which is also either out on the bookstore or if they've already gone, there are flyers for that. However, only buy that if you've still got money jangling in your pockets after buying some of Don's books, because you might just as well go for the best first. We are in, as we break, Don is going to come down to the front and be ready to sign the books for you. But before we do that, although you've already given him one round of enormously warm applause, I think we could do with a further round of applause for a wonderful day. Thank you, Don.